Hey all, welcome back to another math video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how we can prove two triangles are congruent. What we're going to do is we're going to look at certain theorems, okay? There's 4 theorems we're going to look at today that involve being given that certain sides or angles are congruent, we can prove that certain triangles are congruent triangles. And we'll also talk about a little bit why that's important to know that certain triangles are congruent and what benefits that really gives us. So let's get started by actually looking at some of the theorems that can help us prove that triangles are congruent. Here we have our first one. It is called the side angle side congruency theorem, okay, or some people call it criterion. Really, most of the time you'll see it abbreviated as SAS, which means side angle side. And I gotta tell you guys, for these theorems that we're going to cover today, order does matter. The order in which things are laid out matters. If it's side angle side, it needs to be side angle side in that order. I'll talk about that right now when we look at this triangle. But essentially what we're talking about is if I have two triangles, here I have two triangles, I can see that they both have in common or congruent sides, an angle and a side. So the first side would be this one with the 1 tick mark. I know that this side of the triangle is congruent. So ST is congruent to YZ. I also know that this angle Y, or this angle S, is congruent to angle Y. And SR is congruent to YX. So we have a side, an angle, and a side that are congruent. Notice that the angle that's congruent is also in the middle. This matters, okay? So we have a side, angle, side. A side, angle, side. If they have these three things in this order, congruent, then we can say that these two triangles are congruent triangles. Okay? We're proving that triangles are congruent. Alright? The reason why we want to do this, and the reason behind all of these theorems, like why do I want to prove that two triangles are congruent, is because congruent triangles, the nice thing is about it, when you can prove that two triangles are congruent, you know that the corresponding parts of that triangle will also be congruent. Okay, so they might only give us one angle that's congruent with each other, but if we can prove that the whole triangles are congruent, we know that corresponding angles on the whole triangle, and let me go ahead and actually show you in a diagram what I mean by the word corresponding parts, okay, because it's actually a theorem, okay. So here we're going to look at, here's a picture of two triangles that are congruent. If we know that these two triangles are congruent, I simply have to match up their parts. So for example, if they're congruent triangles, that means everything about them is equal to each other. So angle B in this triangle is like angle Y in this triangle. Both of these angles would be congruent. Angle X is like angle A. It corresponds to angle A. If I were to rotate this triangle right here, it would match up where A goes to X, B goes to Y, and C goes to Z. So C would be congruent to Z. Okay, all of their angles are corresponding are congruent to their corresponding angles, okay? And same with the side lengths. So if they tell me that this long side for this triangle is 8, then I know this would also be 8, okay? Basically, congruent triangles have everything alike in common. It's like the same triangle, but with different letters, all right? And as long as you can match up the letters, you know everything about the other triangle. They can give me all of the information about A, B, and C. They can tell me all of these side lengths. And if I have all of these side lengths and I know that these triangles are corresponding or congruent, then I know everything about this other triangle. So congruent triangles allow me to find out everything about each other triangle. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's take a look at some other theorems, all right, that help us prove this. Again, we're trying to prove that triangles are congruent by using 4 different theorems. The first one we just covered was side angle side. Now let's look at one that's called side, side, side. So here, if you have 3 congruent sides, you know that all these triangles are congruent to each other. Side, side, side. SSS. That's what we call this one. SSS. So here you can see side AB is congruent to side ED. You see that side BC is congruent to side EF. And you can see that side AC is congruent to DF. So because they have 3 congruent sides, we know that these are congruent triangles. We can say that these triangles are congruent by the side, side, side theorem. Okay? Or we don't even say theorem, we just say by SSS. Okay? Let's go ahead and let's look at this next one. This is the angle, side, angle. So here we have 2 triangles. And what we want to do is we want to look at these, and we can see here is that they have 2 angles in common. So these are congruent. These 2 are congruent. And then they also have this side length in the middle that's congruent as well. So we have a side, or an angle, a side, and an angle. So again, the order of these matters, okay? Notice in the name that the side is in the middle. Angle, side, angle. Side has to be in the middle. When we're looking at our triangles, the side that's congruent needs to be in between those 2 angles. We have to have an angle that corresponds, a side in the middle, and then another angle on the other side of that side. Okay, the order of these matters. So again, this is angle, side, angle. And this would also prove that 2 triangles are congruent. The last one that we want to talk about is the angle, angle, side. AAS. So here we have 2 triangles. Angle U corresponds to angle X, and those are congruent. Angle V is congruent to angle Y. So we have 2 angles. Now we just need them to have a side, and they in fact do. Side VW and side YZ are congruent. So we have an angle next to an angle next to a side that are all congruent to an angle, angle, side on the other triangle. So because we have these 3 things in the same order, we know that these 2 triangles are in fact congruent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some examples of some triangles, and we're going to try to see, can we prove that these triangles are actually congruent triangles? And we have 4 different triangle congruency sort of theorems, criterion that we're trying to follow. We have side, angle, side. We have side, side, side. We have angle, side, angle, and angle, angle, side. So let's see if we can do this. And I'll go ahead and I'll write them down so that we can remember which ones we're allowed to use. So we have the options of saying that they're congruent by side, angle, side, 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 angle, side, angle, or angle, angle, side. So let's see if we can use any of these to prove that these 2 triangles are congruent. So here we have these 2 sides that are congruent. We have an angle in between them. And then we have a final side. So we have a side, angle, side. Is that one of our 4? It sure is. So these would be congruent by side, angle, side. And that's how we prove this. Okay, we're going to take these same 4, and we're going to see if we can apply them to these. Alright, so again, I'll write them down so that we don't have to look back and forth. Side, angle, side, 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 angle, side, angle, and then we have the last one, angle, angle, side. So if you want, you can pause the video here to see if you can correctly match these up, and then you can press play when you're ready. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to solve them right now. So this first one, I can see here that we have an angle, we have a side, and then we have another side. So we have angle, side, side, angle, side, side, which unfortunately there is not a theorem that goes by angle, side, side. So I don't have enough information here to prove that these two would be congruent. So not enough info. This next one, I got one side. Now I have two sides. And in reality, these triangles share one side that's the same. So technically, this one in the middle is congruent by side, 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 because they have three sides that are in common. So these two would be congruent triangles. On this last one, we can see that we have this side congruent to this one. We have these two sides that are congruent. And the nice thing about this one is that we know that the two blue sides, the two lines that are highlighted in blue on the bottom here, are also parallel to each other, which would actually allow us to assume that these two angles on the inside right here, those two angles are actually congruent by the alternate interior angles theorem. Okay, these are alternate interior angles, and we know that these two angles are actually congruent. So therefore, I actually have a side angle side here. So I can prove that these are congruent by side angle side. Now, key part in math a lot of times is being able to figure out what am I trying to do. Because if you can figure that out, a lot of times how to solve these problems makes more sense. All we're trying to do right now is prove whether or not triangles are congruent or not. And we're using these four theorems to help us prove that. Let's look at the last couple of examples. Okay, again, here are our theorems: SAS, SSS, angle side angle, and angle angle side. So SAS, we got a side, an angle, and then we have our last angle that are congruent to each other. So I got a side angle angle. Now if I read it that way, I might think that I don't have one. Okay, but if I read it backwards, angle angle side, I'd realize that, oh, it's actually one of the theorems I have. So this one is actually congruent by angle angle side. This last one, I have this angle. Technically, all these four angles are congruent to each other, and that's okay. And we got these bases of the triangle that are congruent. And this allows me to say that these two are congruent. I know that these are because we got an angle, a side, and an angle. So that is definitely ASA. So these are congruent by ASA. And that is a few examples on how we can prove two triangles are congruent by using SAS, SSS, ASA, and AAS. So hopefully now you feel that you can use side angle side, side side side, angle side angle, and angle angle side to prove that two triangles are congruent. Again, there's quite a few benefits that come by being able to prove this. We'll get to some of those problems later on, but hopefully now you go on and tackle some problems where you try and prove that two triangles are congruent. As always, I just want to thank you guys for watching, and I hope you continue to learn through these videos.